Welcome back to College Football Addiction. Finally, some closure coming in the ACC versus Clemson and Florida State lawsuits. It very much seems that way. It seems like by tomorrow, maybe around this time, maybe a little bit later, we may have a settlement coming. And this is, over the last few months, what we have certainly expected out of the arguments between Florida State and Clemson. We'll talk about the settlement. We'll talk about the pros, the cons for Florida State, Clemson, the pros, the cons for the ACC. Did one side win on this? Did one side do a little bit better than the other? I have a take there. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are as well. This is, at the end of the day, if you watched our FSU videos with Doug Rohan of Rohan Law, this is where we expected things to get. We never really thought that this would get to court. We never really thought that this would get to a place where one side won completely over the other. Never really expected there to be anything but a settlement. So who came out ahead? Well, by very definition, both teams won and both teams lost, right? Like that's a compromise. But at the end of the day, I do think that one side did clearly come out ahead. You might call me biased or not. We'll see when we get to it, but I would like to hear your thoughts down below. Essentially, if you're living under a rock, or this did just come out recently, so I won't give you too hard of a time if you're not already aware, Clemson, Florida State, and the ACC will be likely dropping their lawsuits against each other, all four of them, in exchange for increased revenue for programs that essentially bring in the most eyeballs. This initiative, as well as the new media value bonus pool, is an attempt for Commissioner Jim Phillips and league administrators to reward winning in a way that helps close the financial gap between the ACC and the two richest conferences, the SEC and the Big Ten. This all from Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports. The difference in payout for the school that ranks first in the ACC and 18th in the conference could be up to $20 million annually, a source projected. So let's say Clemson has the most eyeballs once this goes into effect. And let's say Wake Forest is last, right? Not picking on Wake Forest, but let's just pick a program out that has typically performed pretty poorly when it comes to TV eyeballs. One source to Dellinger says that that could be a difference of about $20 million. Ross goes on to say that the ACC's television contract struck years ago is a point of contention for many of its members. The deal with ESPN pays the conference a fraction of what the SEC and the Big Ten earn from their television partners. The gap in television distribution at the heart of the FSU and Clemson litigation could soar to more than $30 million per school within the next 2 years. We did a video just a couple of weeks ago where we broke down what each school would be making, or what each conference would make per school through the media contracts. And yeah, it gets well over $30 million, like Ross just told you. I know people said, oh, the gap's not that much. It is. The gap is absolutely that much. And so a big deal for the ACC's top brands to try and close that gap. Pete Thamel said of ESPN, said 40% of TV money is going to be distributed evenly among legacy ACC schools, so not your Cal, Stanfords, SMUs, anybody else they would add. And 60% will be based on ratings, a ratings formula that's been calculated over the last 5 years. Ross's number and Thamel's number are a little bit different here, but top ACC earners could net more than $15 million, while some schools will see a net reduction of about $7 million. The other side of this, it's not just the money that they will be, and so I have thoughts on those in just a second, but the other side of this, it's not just the money that you're being paid more, right, to stay in the conference for longer. It's also maybe getting out of the conference a little bit earlier. Thamel says that the settlement with the ACC is expected to provide a defined penalty fee to FSU, Clemson, and other members that expect to, at some point, exit the conference and break the grant of rights. The ACC's grant of rights is quite literally grants television rights of a member to the league. There is no established financial penalty for leaving, but any exiting member would risk the conference enforcing the agreement and remaining in control of its television rights. The settlement is believed to establish financial penalties for leaving before the grant of rights expires in 2536, presumably a penalty structure that decreases with each year closer to the end of the agreement. However, there is a separate exit fee that is defined in league bylaws requiring an exiting member to pay 2 years worth of per school distribution. Stakeholders believe that the next major shift within the industry will come between the 2030-2032 years with a litany of events that could trigger sweeping changes in college sports landscape already made unstable as it shifts into a more professionalized model. Thamel reported that the total cost to exit the league around the 29-30 year is expected to drop to below $100 million, a much more palatable amount if a program wanted to leave. So now that you know the what about the how, the why? What is the big takeaway here? Well, again, it's not a complete win or loss for either side, but I will lean towards this being a bigger win for Florida State and Clemson than it is for the ACC. How is it a win for the ACC? Well, they're going to most likely keep their top brands locked in until around that 2030 year, right? Now, after that, all bets are off. If Florida State and Clemson feel like they can pony up 80, 90, 95 million, whatever that number is, that's below $100 million to get out, then they'll do it. If the gap between the ACC and the SEC is $40 million in 2030, then paying $80 million, you recoup that in just 2 years. You're also in a league that provides you an opportunity to have more teams in the playoff, more money coming in from playoff revenue, right? We're just talking about the TV revenue at this moment, but you understand that the SEC and the Big Ten, by getting more teams in the playoff and by getting a bigger piece of the pie, they make a lot more than just that $30 to $40 million gap, right? It's even more money due to all the other financial incentives that are structured in. So I would lean toward this being a bigger win for FSU and Clemson, but there are some benefits to the ACC getting to keep their brands in the league. Ultimately, this is what FSU asked for. In the Dellinger article, in the Yahoo Sports article, he talked about how Michael Alford asked for this in 2023, early 2023. He was talking about unequal revenue sharing. And the ACC said, nope, we're not doing it. There's no way that we will agree to that. And so now we've had almost 2 years worth of lawsuits going, a year and a half worth of lawsuits, 2 years worth of balking, 2 years worth of going back and forth and arguing, and this person being a bad member of a conference, this one not being so bad, but they still sued, and the North Carolina debacle and everything else that's gone on, when essentially Florida State is just getting what they asked for a year and a half ago. And it took the filing of lawsuits, it took the going back and forth to accomplish that. Now, it's not a complete win for either side, but again, because of that, I have to lean towards it being a bigger win for FSU. I just wonder if the money that would have been saved on Florida State's part, on Clemson's part, on UNC's part with the Carolina Blue matter, on the rest of the league's part, right? Who's paying the bills for the ACC side of the lawsuits? Well, the answer is all 18 teams that are in the league, right? Because it's money that's taken off the annual income for the conference. So essentially, this lawsuit charade by everyone costs the league and every member of the league money. Certainly cost Florida State and Clemson more, certainly cost North Carolina a good bit with them spending $600,000. And it wasn't a insane amount of money for any other one team, but it cost everyone money to basically just get to what Florida State asked for a couple of years ago. Not only is Florida State getting what they want with unequal revenue sharing and Clemson's getting what they wanted with unequal revenue sharing, they're also getting out of the league 5 to 6 years faster. Or have the ability to, right? Like, I'm not projecting the future and telling you that in 2030, they're definitely gone. But if the penalties are reduced, and that's what Florida State and Clemson are asking for, you can bet that they're going to be trying to get out of the league around that time. So if the ACC would have just given Florida State what they wanted back in early 2023, and Florida State was still locked in through 2036, just making more money through that time, that'd be an even bigger win for the ACC. So because of that, I'd have to say that this is a bigger win for Florida State and Clemson than it is for the ACC. Another reason I'd say that it's a bigger win for Florida State is because maybe that grant of rights wasn't as solid as Twitter lawyers would have you to believe. If the grant of rights was so solid and Florida State and Clemson had zero chance, why would the ACC agree to anything? Why would the ACC give in at all? If this was such a simple IP lawsuit that was just so easy to see. And you didn't even, as a Twitter lawyer, you didn't even understand why they were litigating this. Why did the ACC give in? Why did the ACC give up a chance to prove it in court? Is the ACC just being nice? Are they just being kind? Do they have Clemson and Florida State's thoughts and feelings at the top of their mind? I don't think so. I think they knew that maybe that grant of rights wasn't as solid as Twitter lawyers would have you to believe it was. Just my take there. I can't guarantee that. But the ACC ultimately gave in. And if we're being fair, Florida State and Clemson gave in too, right? They want to be out of the conference tomorrow, and that's not necessarily going to happen. But they gave in on their side too. That's what a compromise is. But if you had to ask me which side won this, I'd say that the side that is getting what they originally asked for in 2023 and more, I'd say that side probably won. If you boil the entire thing down, not to belabor the point, but if you boil the entire thing down, Florida State asks for X in 2023. The ACC says no. They file lawsuits. They fight against each other for almost 2 years. And then the ACC gives in and says, okay, you can have X and you can have Y and you can get out of the conference earlier. I think that's a pretty good deal for Florida State. I think that's a pretty good deal for Clemson. Is it what the fans wanted? No, the fans want to be in the Big Ten or the SEC tomorrow. I get that. They want to play this upcoming year in that. So do I. I get it. I'm right there with you. But if you just look at it from that perspective, yeah, I think that Florida State and Clemson won this thing. Now, the biggest question that I have, is the amount of money enough? Is that $15 million that you're closing the gap, is that enough to still compete with the SEC and the Big Ten? Maybe, right? Maybe for the first couple of years, maybe for 26, 27, 28, but then 29 and 30, that's where that gap grows incredibly wide. And it's $30 to $40 million. And you also have the playoff revenue that is skewed towards the SEC, and they're getting more money from that. That's where I worry about the gap. I think Florida State and Clemson will be fine for the next couple of years. That gap still balloons up so much. And I worry about the gap in totality. Maybe we'll do a video on all of those things specifically. But I think that this is kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. It's not as bad. You're getting a little bit. It doesn't satisfy the entire need. And so, yeah, it's good, right? You'll take an extra $15 million over nothing. But I don't know that it completely solves the problem that Florida State and Clemson find themselves in, which is they are not going to make as much as the big boys, right? They're not going to make as much as the Big Ten and the SEC. It's helpful. You're not going to turn it away. You're going to have to be creative for the next 5 or 6 years until you can get to another conference. But again, it's better than nothing, right? So that's essentially what a compromise is. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Am I right? Am I wrong about anything? Do you think the ACC won here? I don't know how you argue that at this point with the fact that this is essentially just what Florida State asked for back in the day. But if you want to take that side, I'm completely okay with it. I'll hear you out at least. Ultimately, a good thing for Florida State and Clemson. Is it the massive slam dunk victory that we wanted? Probably not, but probably a good thing overall. What are your thoughts? What do you think here? Let's talk about it down in the comments. I appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning into College Football Addiction.